I live in a very small town in Hungary, right at the edge of town, with only my neighbor and a forest next to us. From a very young age, we have been playing in the forest and have witnessed strange things there. One day, my friend Barlin told me about Bigfoot, and I immediately became curious and wanted to explore the forest in search of it. I must emphasize that I was only 7 years old at the time. Armed with a hatchet, a knife, flashlights, and some food, we ventured into the forest, exploring different areas. We would often split up, with the train tracks serving as a dividing point, and we would also explore the ruins of an old house. There was a bridge under the train track that passed over a river, and there we discovered large patches of fur. My friend even kept a sample of it. We also had a ranch where we kept horses, and we noticed that some fences were scratched, torn, and broken in half. In the scratches, we found bits of fur. This only fueled our determination to find Bigfoot. We set up traps, baited areas, and even went camping in the forest, occasionally sleeping there and keeping watch at night from my house. During our encounters, we witnessed several unusual incidents. The first time, we discovered a patch of fur. On another occasion, we saw a human-like creature eating parsnips from our vegetable garden at night while I was feeding the dogs. I immediately informed my father, and we returned with his gun. However, the creature ran away even faster when it noticed us. My father, who is the type of person who would be slapped by an alien and not believe it, was stunned by what he saw. In another incident, my friend's rabbits were mysteriously cut open and released from their cages. It was done with surgical precision, with half of their insides missing. Then, during a late-night exploration, I bent down to tie my shoe while my friend continued to look around. Suddenly, a 6-foot-tall creature ran past me towards my friend. He jumped in surprise, and the flashlight he was holding illuminated the creature clearly. It was definitely something not from this world, standing 6 feet tall, with light brown hair and a hulking build. The creature ran over my friend, leaving him with a broken rib. After that incident, we never went back to the forest. The town mayor, with whom I have a good relationship, called the police when he noticed dogs going missing. He informed me that other animals had also disappeared or turned up dead. I can't help but wonder if I set up traps. Would I catch anything? Nobody in the town suspects Bigfoot, nor do they consider the incident with my friend's rabbits to be related to Bigfoot. However, I can't help but find it all very suspicious. There is definitely something strange out there in the forest. When I was young, my dad lived in an old log cabin located approximately 15 miles west of Sheridan, Wyoming, in the foothills of the Bighorn Mountains. Every summer when I visited him, we would embark on backpacking and fishing trips in the mountains, spending 2 days each weekend exploring remote areas, fishing for trout, and setting up camp wherever we ended up. During these trips, we encountered various strange and creepy things, including some hair-raising encounters with wildlife. However, one particular incident stands out in my memory: the discovery of an ancient abandoned camp. On one occasion, we were hiking down a steep slope, making our way towards a creek that had been dammed up by beavers, with hopes of catching some big trout. As I was scouting for a way down, my attention was drawn to an old rusty rifle sticking out of a tree, with the tree having grown around the barrel over the course of many years. The rifle was situated about 10 feet above the ground, and I climbed down to investigate further. To my surprise, I found a small cave-like formation at the base of the tree, measuring only about 12 inches deep. While it could have served as a natural shelter, it would have been a terrible place to set up a long-term camp. Inside the cave, we discovered a collection of really old items. There were 3 unopened cans of food, made of heavy gauge metal. We also found a Norwood cast iron pot that had rusted through, a crusty old saddle and bridle, and a very deteriorated heavy woolen blanket rolled up and tied with a leather belt. When we unwrapped the blanket, we uncovered several personal belongings, including a rusty old cap, a black powder revolver, a leather satchel containing lead pistol shots, and a powder horn that was empty of black powder. There were also tarnished old cartridges, presumably for the rifle in the tree, a straight razor, and most unsettling of all, a shirt with holes in it, and over half of it stained with dried blood. As we stood there, pondering the significance of these findings, it struck me just how remote and isolated this place was, even in July 1985. The fact that someone had been seriously injured while wearing that blood-stained shirt, stranded on a steep slope in the middle of nowhere, sent a shiver down my spine. The only things that somewhat hinted at the time period were the pistol and rifle, both of which were manufactured in the 1870s, according to my father. We could never know what had happened to the man who owned all these belongings, but the circumstances strongly suggested that he had not left the area alive. Discovering what amounted to a 100-year-old crime scene in such a remote wilderness was eerie, but it mostly left me with a sense of sadness, imagining the hopelessness and loneliness the man must have felt before his demise. Curiosity got the better of me, and I asked my dad if I could keep the pistol. He simply replied, "It's not mine to give, and we're not thieves." Instead, he chose to teach me a valuable lesson about respecting the dead and preserving history. Carefully inspecting everything, we put each item back exactly as we had found it. My dad then instructed me to remove my hat and observe a moment of silence and reflection as a sign of respect for the man who likely lost his life on that mountain. Afterward, we continued with our fishing trip. Over the years, I made several attempts to relocate that spot, especially now that I have sons of my own. Regrettably, I have never been able to find it again. When I was around 13, I went camping with my Girl Scout troop. This wasn't uncommon for us as we camped often, at least twice a year. The only difference was that my troop had the privilege to camp out 2 nights in a cabin. The cabins were not big. I was 5 feet tall, and if I were to lay down widthwise, we only had about 3 feet of walking space between the bunks. Each side had 2 sets of bunk beds, so there were 8 beds in each cabin, and there were 4 cabins. We had a large troop, so we occupied 3 cabins, including the moms who stayed the night with us. During the day, we went on activities as normal. Other troops came to spend the day, and we did knots, crafts, archery, and other sports-like events. This ended around 7 when all the other girls went home. Around this time, we cooked dinner, ate, and started a fire. We sat around and had girl talk like normal, ate doughboys and marshmallows until 9 o'clock, when we had to go to bed due to the camp's curfew. In my cabin, I had my 2 best friends, one in the bed below me and the other in the bunk across from me. We had bunks that were closest to the window. To imagine the cabin, just imagine a rectangle with walls and a screen door. Now go into the screen door and I'll guide you. There are, as I said, 4 bunks under each end of the corridor or window. My mom was sleeping in the cabin across the way with my troop leader and the other moms. Soon, we were all asleep. My friend Lisa, who was below me, isn't very good at sleeping outside, so she was soon awake and sitting on the edge of my bunk, poking me. I cracked my eyes open and shone my flashlight at Lisa and at Atara, who was sitting across the way. She was awake as well. Since we weren't technically allowed to be awake unless we were using the bathroom, we decided to go get my mom, who would take us through the trail to the bathroom just to let Lisa catch a breather. By now, the fire was basically out, and we had my flashlight as our light source. So, we bundled up because New England is freezing at night, even if it's spring. As we were getting dressed, I put my flashlight in my mouth so I could use both hands. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow. I thought it was my own, and camp was playing tricks on me, but I looked anyway. My scream may have broken all the rules in camp about curfew. My entire cabin was up, my friends were screaming, and my mom and my leader were trampling over each other to get into the cabin. When I turned to look at the shadow, I saw what was actually a man staring through the window. I don't know how long he was there for, and when I started screaming, he took off. My troop leader talked to the ranger the next day, and he said that he would talk to the night ranger, but we never got any other answers other than maybe it was an animal. Either way, we never went camping there again, and this incident still haunts me to this day. So, creepy pervy man, Let's not meet again. I live in eastern Pennsylvania. My friends and I were hunting coyotes at night, at about 2 a.m. We were going up an unfamiliar logging trail. We had reached a clearing and eventually ran across a log that lay across the road. We stood around for a moment, talking, when we started hearing a sound. He said it sounded like sticks breaking. I think it sounded like someone hitting a dull axe against the log. The sound was, by my estimate, 150 yards away. I, being the more experienced one, said it was just the wind. But it was extremely irregular, like one knock every 30 to 45 seconds. It wasn't coinciding with the gust of winds and the changing location of bits, but remained in the same area. We also heard the noise a few times off to the side in the trees, and it sounded like it was approaching us, as if two separate things were making the noises. We felt uneasy and began to leave. That is when the sounds all stopped. After that, we left in my car. He pointed out that the woods became definitely silent while the noise was being made, and I pointed out that it stopped once we left. I remember people saying Bigfoot would break sticks to communicate or warn people. I looked up the noise, and it's called tree knocking. It perfectly fit the description of what happened to me. Being a skeptic, I would like to know if anything else may have been making that noise. Did anyone else have any similar experiences? And do you think that I ran across a cryptid? I used to, and still am, a Scouts leader. Each year, we go during the New Year period to camping sites. Being in Canada, the New Year weather is pretty damn cold. Think -22 to -30. So camping is done in lodges. The lodge which we slept in had no toilets. So each night before we went to bed, I'd round up my Scouts and walk them to the bathroom, which happened to be in another lodge about a minute's walk away. That year, I happened to have 2 really immature kids, and they were taking way too much time to get ready. So I sent my Scouts to the washroom and told them that I'd like to catch up with them once the 2 guys would stop mucking around. A few minutes later, we were on our way, and by then, most of the children had already brushed their teeth and been to the toilet. When I finally entered the lodge, I could see that most of them had congregated around the vending machine in the hallway across the toilet. So I entered the toilet with the 2 kids that were with me, and I checked to see if anyone is still in there. "Is anyone in the toilet?" I yelled into the stalls. "Yes!" I recognized the voice of Jay, one of my Scouts. Then I proceeded to brush my teeth. A few minutes later, I said again, "Is everything good?" "Yes." This time I recognized the voice of another kid. At that moment, I made nothing of it, and assumed I just misheard the voice the first time round. Another couple of minutes had passed, and even the 2 difficult kids I was there with had finished preparing themselves. So I asked again, "Is everything good?" Nothing this time. So I asked the 2 other kids to start opening the stalls and see if something had happened to W. There were about 8 stalls, all of which were empty. The 2 kids started freaking out because they too had heard these voices, and since they've been using the sink, which was right next to the door, there was no way that someone could have passed without being noticed. So I sent them to the shower stalls. Again, no one. The 2 kids were now becoming very agitated. So I decided it's time to regroup in the hallway to head back. Back in the hallway, I see both J and W, who both deny having entered the washrooms after I came in. To this day, my Scout squadron refers to this incident as the Poop Monster incident. These stories didn't happen to me, but to my grandmother and my mother. Both of them swear by these stories. Over the years, I would ask them to retell them, and they would always be the same. When my mom was a young girl, about age 10 to 16, she lived in the house with my grandma. So, my mom's room was upstairs above the kitchen and below the attic. Both my mom and grandma claimed to hear strange sounds coming from the attic, but they assumed it was just an old house and possibly even rodents. But when my mom became a teenager, she would occasionally get up at night, sometimes sneaking around the house or going to get food or sneak out with friends. However, before then, She would never really leave her room at night. There was one particular night she told me about. She said that her mouth was extremely dry and it had woken her up. She exited her room and went downstairs into the kitchen for a drink. But she saw something at the bottom of the stairs. It was a man. He was sitting on the bottom steps, hunched over. My mom froze. She didn't think that he had heard her. Otherwise, he would have moved. So she tried to get a better look at him. She said that he was very faintly transparent, but other than that, looked like a solid man. He had dark overalls on with a worn-out hat. From the side, it looked like he had a beard. My mom started to get creeped out and ran back to her room, occasionally looking back just to make sure he wasn't following her, which he didn't. When she was telling me this 20 years later, she said that the feelings surrounding him were so sad, they had actually scared the shit out of her. On the other hand, my grandma knew he was there all along. She felt him when they first moved in. She said that every time she would get home from driving my mom to work or school, she would come home and would get this urge to look up at the attic window. He would be standing there just looking out, not at anything in particular. He would just be standing there, looking out at nothing. The first few times, my grandma would go upstairs to make sure it wasn't an intruder. But by the time she got there, he would be gone. No footsteps in the dust. She said he was just harmless, but at the same time, he was very eerie. She called him crazy, but never explained why. After years of living with him, his sad aura, walking around, his redecorating habits, his window gazing, my grandma said that one event really stuck. My mom was in her late teens, and my grandma had just gotten married. Grandma almost had everything packed and was ready to move, but she couldn't find my mom's baby book. Grandma looked absolutely everywhere, and I mean everywhere, but she couldn't find them. She felt horrible for losing them and said that she just sat on the couch crying over those baby books. So she went upstairs to the bathroom to go wipe her face, and when she came back, she saw what was on the couch and froze. Exactly on the spot where she had just been sitting were the baby books, 4 bulky baby photo albums. She quickly put them in the box and took it out to the car. She said that as they were leaving, she saw the old man in the window. Grandma said that over the years, she came across people who had lived in the house, and when my grandma went to ask, "Can I ask you something about your attic?" they would reply with, "Did you see the old man too?" I'm currently living only a block away from that exact house, so I went over and took a picture of it. I circled the window where he stands. The current residents have a curtain in that window, which sucks because I haven't actually seen him, but who knows. My house was originally a church that got torn down to build our house on it, and it still had the graveyard right next door. My brother's room was the worst. He got lucky when we first got the house by beating me, the bigger room, and claiming it as his own. But that room had a little window that opened up to the graveyard, and I tried to spend a few nights in his room, but I just never could. It would always get pretty unsettling in that inexplicable, deep down, afraid of dying sort of way that just tells your body to get up and go. My brother is stubborn though, so he dealt with it. There was one night where me and the rest of my household woke up to a loud rumble. We walked out into the hallway to see a cloud of white dust pouring out from under his door. Well, what happened was that in the middle of the night, he woke up. His sheets were down at the base of his bed, and it was freezing. So he tried to pull them back up, but they got stuck halfway, and then they were ripped off his bed. He was absolutely terrified and ran downstairs to get some sleep. No sooner had he done so, the ceiling above his bed collapsed. It was super freaky and super lucky. Was it a coincidence? I don't know, but it always makes me wonder. This happened 2 years ago. I was in England with my Boy Scout troop for a weekend in February. Everything was normal until the second day when it had started to snow really heavily. So me and my 2 friends, let's call them Matthew and Lewis, decided to go and play hide and seek in the snow. I got all my warm clothes on and snuck out, which wasn't that hard because there was a window in our room. When I got out, They decided that I should be it, so I gave them 3 minutes to hide. After that, I ran in vaguely the same direction that I heard them go in. After about 4 minutes of looking, I was about to give up when I heard a weird mumbling noise. I ran over and shouted at the top of my lungs, "Found you!" But to my surprise, instead of finding a boy wrapped in winter clothes, I found a small white humanoid crouched over next to the carcass of what looked like a large dog. I quickly jumped up and ran away. I could hear it right behind me, jumping from border to border. Eventually, I could see the hut we were staying in. Then, I did something I wished I hadn't. I turned around. I saw this thing stand up and realized that what I had originally thought to have been small was about the same height as me. I could see its big yellow fangs dripping with warm blood, and its eyes were deep red. And behind the door, it opened. It was my leader. I turned around, and he was mad and asked me where I had been for so long. It turned out that I had been gone for about half an hour. I went through with them exactly what had happened, and as expected, no one believed me. The rest of the trip was normal, but 3 months later, I was shocked to find out that the exact same place I had been closed by the police. After a 12-year-old child had gone missing for 2 days, he was found on a river, totally mutilated. Apparently his throat had been ripped open, and his intestines had almost been eaten, along with half his leg. All I can say is, I'm never going back to that place again. When I was a child, I used to have the strangest dreams. I would find myself in sun-drenched playing fields with a 6-year-old African girl, her hair in twists, clad in red and white checkered green and proper. Eventually her father, an enormous dusty farmer fellow equipped with a pitchfork and leading a horse, would call her home. She would wave goodbye, and I would seize awake. I had this dream several times, each time similar, the only difference being the game we played. Perhaps ball, perhaps hunting for insects, or simply lazing around in the grass. I knew her name was Sarah. I knew her family worked on the land. Somehow, I knew the land. Then one night, I had a lucid dream. I was in my bed and thought it was the middle of the night. Lights streamed into the room as if it were noon, and Sarah was by my bed, tugging up my nightgown sleeve. She pleaded with me to get up and play with her, and followed her out of my room to the particular set of stairs leading to the spooky 3rd floor. I was suddenly filled with dread, and then, in my head, seeing that particular look in my mother's eyes before she told me that my great-grandmother had died. Sarah whirled around, eyes inquisitive, her playful demands to come upstairs to play honed by something sinister. Her father appeared at the top of the stairwell, horse and all I could think was, "This is ridiculous. How could a horse go up all those stairs?" I told her I could not and would not go up and play with her. She looked at me so sadly, the saddest, oldest sad I've ever seen. I woke up that morning, asleep at the foot of the stairs, filled with the deepest sadness I'd ever felt. I never had the dream again. However, shortly after, the gardens unearthed an old hitching post in the backyard. Many years later, I went for a hike across my street in search of an apocryphal graveyard, the oldest freed black cemetery in the north. I waded through the smallish swamp in my neighbor's yard and trudged up the hill to the area I had seen marked on an ancient map. There was a cemetery invisible from the road, with 15 or so headstones. While many of them were impossible to read and others fallen and broken, one stood out. Its memorial tree had grown around it, encasing the stone in the tree, shielding it from the elements. The body beneath was named Sarah. She died at the age of 7 and had inhabited whatever structure existed when my house now stands. These stories are from my parents' old house. The first being that there were multiple occasions where I fell asleep on the couch and would somehow, without explanation, without anyone else taking me, and without doing it myself, wake up in my room. Not to mention, I would see someone standing at the top of the stairs and occasionally hear footsteps upstairs when no one was home. I'd always have the feeling that someone else was there. Strangely enough, the person I saw at the top of the stairs was also a lady in white, although she was very young. I'll never forget the night that we moved out, because it was one of the scariest things that I can remember. Over the last few days, the footsteps had gotten so bad and so much louder to the point that it sounded like someone was almost running upstairs. It got to the point where I felt brave enough to look, and as my head peered upstairs, I saw some horrifying large black shadow dart into my parents' room. As I was home alone shortly after, the heavy footsteps started running around in circles upstairs. I legitimately thought at that point that there must be someone in the house, so I grabbed a bat and ran upstairs. As soon as I hit the top floor, the footsteps stopped abruptly, and there was no one there. But not 5 seconds had passed, and I heard a crash in the garage. I was extremely relieved because my mom had likely just gotten home and started to pack the rest of the boxes into her car. I ran downstairs and opened the door to the garage, but my mom wasn't there. The boxes that had previously been stacked very neatly were tossed clear across the room, spread all over the place. As the adrenaline kicked in, I heard footsteps running upstairs and a door slam. That was it. I noped right out of the house and waited on the porch. It was weird because up until that point, whatever was in my house had been non-intrusive and friendly. That was until we decided to move. Ever since that house, I've been really curious about paranormal things. Part of me thinks it was obviously a ghost, but I also want more definitive proof. Ghost TV shows never satisfied this, as they would often comment on something that you couldn't see or verify. I felt, "It's cold in here," or "I heard something. Did you see that happen off camera?" You get what I mean. So when I went to my friend's house several years later and found everyone playing with a Ouija board, I was pretty excited. I had never seen one before, but I knew how they worked. I joined in, and after talking to 2 ghosts, it was pretty obvious that one of my friends was moving it. You could see the guy. He had that "I'ma scare everyone" look on his face, so we kicked him off. At this point, I should probably present some backstory. According to my girlfriend, who has a really hard time believing in anything supernatural, her sister has been haunted since she was a child. Everything from seeing a small child run in front of the television multiple times, multiple people seeing the same tall man lurking in the dark, to a light bulb exploding in her bedroom, and then the door slamming and locking itself. The light in that room stopped working, and every electrician they hired couldn't figure out what was wrong. At the time of this story, they were in the process of moving out of their house and had basically no furniture left in it. Fortunately for my curiosity and the relevance of this story, she was also in the room. At that point, it was only me and another guy who I really trusted and knew wouldn't be moving the planchette around pointlessly, so I asked if there was anything following her that might want to speak. My girlfriend's sister freaked out for a second and made it very clear she did not want to be a part of this at all. But then the planchette moved to yes. We asked it a few more questions. "Will you speak to us?" "Yes." "Will you stay with us if she leaves the room?" "No." "How old are you?" 9. This question was confusing because according to every person in the family, they had seen a very tall man. Does this mean that she was 9 when you started following her? Yes. At this point, she noped out of that room, and the moment she stepped out, the planchette moved straight to goodbye, and that was it. We couldn't speak to it anymore. But then I had a great idea. Let's take the Ouija board to her house and try there. I proposed we convince the poor girl to come with us on the condition that she would be able to put on her headphones and drown out whatever we were saying, as she didn't want to have anything to do with it. We arrived at the house and set up the board on the small island in the kitchen. We wanted to turn the lights off, so she retreated to the kitchen pantry with another person and turned their lights on in there. "Can we speak to the entity we spoke to in the other house?" The planchette moved to yes. "Are you the same entity that's following her around?" Yes. At this point, I wanted proof. I wanted something solid that I could take away from this experience and say, without a doubt, that there is something beyond our understanding. and point to this as proof, at least to myself. Will you move something in the room? No. Will you move something if I'm the only person in the room? No. Would you move something if she was the only one here? Yes. And then I had an idea. It was crucial that nobody in the pantry hear what I was about to say, so I said it very quietly. Could you shut the pantry light off? There was a very uncomfortable silence as the others around me waited to see what happened. The planchette began to move towards yes, but it dragged off the board and towards the pantry. There was a loud slam in the pantry, the lights went out, and everyone screamed. The next moment was one of panic, confusion, and at least for me, achievement. Whatever the hell had just happened in that pantry was exactly why I had been looking for something real that I could point to and say, "This is how I know." After the two had caught their breath, they both told me that there was a wooden board on top of the shelf, leaning against the wall. According to them, the board flipped out from the wall and slammed the shelf, flipping it onto the floor. If I remember correctly, it hit one of them and left a bruise. They weren't sure how the lights went out, though. One possibility is that, in a panic to leave the room, one of them bumped against the switch, but the moment had been too chaotic to really tell beyond a doubt why the light switched off. 70% of the group was ready to nope out, but there were a couple of us, including myself, that wanted to bring the board into the room that had the most activity. It was the same room where their light bulb had exploded, the same room that the dogs would never go, and the same room that the children would avoid looking at when they passed. Me and two others decided to use the board there, and upon walking into the room, it felt like a heavy blanket had been laid upon me. It felt like the sinking feeling when the love of your life tells you to go piss off. It was almost hard to breathe, like your bathroom fills up with steam, except it was very cold. The two of us sat down and started asking questions. However, there was something very different. Before, the planchette had been moving slowly and deliberately across the board, but now it was moving so fast it would almost fly off the board. In fact, at one point, it slipped out from under my fingers and kept on going. The last question we managed to ask it was its name. It began to spin out God. At this point, the other two people noped out of the room and left the board immediately. I told it we had to go and moved it to goodbye. When we left the room, we found out that the other girl who had been in the pantry had to leave the house and was throwing up outside. When we asked her why, she said that the air had felt so heavy that she began to get nauseous. This experience was, without a doubt, the most terrifying and exhilarating of my life. It was exactly what I was looking for and more. One thing stuck with me more than anything else, even more than the slamming board in the pantry, the implications of which still send a wave of terror down my back at the very thought. Just before I left that room, I asked it if it would be willing to stay with me if she went home. It said, yes. As far as the house goes, though, they've been moved out for a couple of years now. Every time they had to go back to collect their things, there was a chair that had moved to a different place in the house. At one point, it was upstairs in the same room that we went into, facing the wall. We drove past it a couple of days later, and it was in the living room, facing the window. A couple of days after that, they opened the garage door, and it was dead center, facing out. I also know that since they moved out, the house has been sold several times, as it seems that the people who move in tend to quickly move out. Even walking past the house is really unnerving, as all the trees in the front are now dead, while all the other trees in the other houses are thriving. It feels almost cliché, but it is very creepy nonetheless. Hey, Joe here. Just wanted to say I appreciate y'all for being here. I know it's a choice to click on the video and listen to the stories, but it really does make me happy to know that y'all are enjoying these videos. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe. I really want to grow this channel and continue to put out stories. I appreciate every single one of you. See you next time.